for your second game, you are actually not going to be starting in Unity. First, we're going to talk a little bit about what's called the MDA framework, the Mechanic, Dynamic, and Aesthetic framework. This is kind of the starting step for any game design process. In game design, whenever you're first starting out, you think of these three core things, and maybe you do it unconsciously, but if you're like working as an actual game developer with a group of people, this is kind of the starting point where you're gonna figure out exactly what you are making, what your goals are. So the MDA framework, like I said, it stands for mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics. And I like this particular graph because I think it's a pretty good combination of simplifying what that means and also being very demonstrative. So, mechanics. Mechanics describe the particular components of the game at the level of data representation and algorithms. So, when you're thinking about mechanics, this is the first thing that you will think of as a game designer. You think about like how your game is going, like what rules your game is going to live by, what type of game it is, things like that. Dynamics describes the runtime behavior of the mechanics acting on player inputs and each other's outputs over time. So the dynamics is basically the player experience. So how do you want your players to interact with your game? How do you want them to feel about the game? What kind of flow do you want to have? Things like that. And the aesthetics describes the desirable emotional responses evoked in the player when it says she specifically, it's he or she interacts with the game system. So aesthetics is basically how it looks, how it sounds, what kinds of emotions and themes are going to be invoked. So I like these arrows here as well because design, from your perspective as the game designer, you're going to think of this as a bottom up thing. Aesthetics usually are kind of the last layer that you're going to put on your game, changing the skin, changing how it looks and feels, adding in those music things like that that you aren't going to start out your game building doing. And then the user experiences it first from the opposite direction. So the first thing they are going to see is how your game looks. First thing they're going to like do is form an emotional response to your game. So if you look at a Steam game, the first thing that they show you is usually like a gameplay trailer. And if you're anything like me, if that trailer looks really like pretty or has really good music or something like that, then I'm automatically interested enough to follow up and look at what the dynamics, what type of game it is. Is it an RPG? Is it like what's going on there? And then I'll delve deeper. But aesthetics is going to be the first thing that your player experiences. Once they are interested, they've bought into the aesthetics, then they play the game using the dynamics of the game. They put in inputs, they get outputs based on the mechanics of your game, how the game's core rules are. So there's several examples here that you could look at if that isn't clear enough for you. If you look up just MDA framework, there are so many graphs, so many different things that you can find that will help clear this out for you. So, like in this one, it's a little bit more detailed. It lists out different examples of mechanics like test timers, user turns, skill tests, quests, levels, points, boards, things like that. The dynamics being the context, the constraints, choices, chance, consequences. And the aesthetics is like how creative it is, how challenging it is, things like that. It's it's not exactly a perfect kind of system, but it's a good system that everyone can kind of apply their game stuff to. So your game that you are going to make next is going to seem pretty familiar because we are going to be writing our own choose your own adventure game. So, in a choose your own adventure book, or if you've played any games like Detroit Become Human, or oh, what's an old Fable, any game where you make choices and there are different outcomes, we're going to be doing a text version of a choose your own adventure. So, think more along the lines of the books that like those books that you used to get when you were kids, and it says if you choose this, go to this page. If you choose this, go to this other page. We're going to be making a game version of that. For this, you are going to need to actually do some creativity. This is going to be entirely your own game. I will just help you figure out how to implement that. And we'll learn some new different types of code with this and some scriptable objects, which are very useful things because they store lots of information and don't get called a bunch. So it makes our game a lot lighter when we use those. And we're going to do a little bit of design work. So that's going to be fun. But what you need to worry about for this first part of getting started with this game is you need to pick a kind of theme. So your mechanics are already basically chosen, right? We know that you are going to be making a choose your own adventure game. That's just how it's going to be. The dynamics are how you interact with it. You're going to choose like choices, the constraints, and things like that. And the aesthetics is really where your creativity is going to shine. So, say I want to make a choose your own adventure where the theme is horror. And with my horror theme, say my character that I'm playing as wakes up in a dark room. There's uh no they don't remember what happened to them. They don't know how they got there. What do they do next? So at this point, I would decide what's the challenge that I want my player to do. So my challenge for this game, I think I'd like my player to try and escape the space that they're in, some kind of mansion perhaps. So escape the mansion. And then that's their win resolution. Their lose resolution is that they are trapped or maybe they die, something along those lines. And challenge being, navigate it successfully. So for your game, pick kind of a theme. Maybe make like a kind of a, you can call it a pic collage. Grab some pictures from the internet that kind of inspire your theme. So maybe with my horror theme, I might find some spooky mansion pictures and maybe some um, monster pictures and things that'll kind of like help guide where I want my game to go just visually. I'm not going to use them in my game design, but I will at least use them for inspiration. Then you need to start writing your story. Once you have your theme, you have what you want your player to be able to do, and all of that. So here's what we are going to use for this. We are going to go to a website called draw.io. So it's draw.io. It is a flowchart maker, and it is really, really useful. Very, very, very useful. So when you get in, first thing it's going to do is ask you to sign in using an account. I recommend you use your school account just because you have that, and there's no reason not to. It'll keep everything on your Google Drive. I am going to create a new game. I'm going to use a basic flowchart. I don't really need to pick any of these others. There's lots of different ones. Like that's pretty cool. You can make tables, you can make software charts, flowcharts, engineering charts. I'm just gonna kind of roll with it with a regular old chart, and it'll ask you to pick a place where you want to put it. So go ahead and figure that out. So once you get all of that sorted, you end up with this grid here. And on the left, you've got different elements that you can add. On the right, it's got different options for how you want to look at your grid. I'm just going to start in the top left corner of my grid, and this is where I'm going to put my start of my game. I think I'll use a rounded rectangle because I like that shape. Make it a little bit bigger and maybe change the color to green because it's my start. And to type, I'm just going to double click. And for the start of my game, I'm going to actually label each one of these layers as I go with a letter and number combination so that I can kind of keep track of which parts of my story go where. So I'm just going to type in that this is call it A0, meaning this is the very tippy top of my chart, and then I'm going to call it, I don't know, the beginning. And then blah, blah, story text. And here I want you to actually write it as you're going to have it in your final game, like how you're going to write this sentence or introductory paragraph out, because we can just at the end copy and paste directly from this to our game and not have to worry about having to retype it and all of that. So I'm going to put in blah blah story text, and then I'm going to say, let's see, one, do this thing, two, do this other thing. So I know that since we're doing a choose your own adventure, in my story, I want my players to choose between different options as they go along. The easiest way we can do that, well, there are a couple of ways, but really, I think the easiest is going to be just having them hit number buttons on their numpad. That way, it takes them right to the next place that they need to go. And I'm done with that one, so I'm going to click off of it. And I'm going to add another rounded rectangle, make it a little bit bigger, kind of off to the side here. And I'm going to duplicate it and put it over here, like so. And I might make this one, I'm going to leave this one green because they come directly from the green one, and it kind of will help me organize things visually. So to make a connection between your flowchart pieces, because right now you just have two unconnected squares from your main square. If you hover over this, it says click to connect and clone. So control click to clone, shift click to connect, drag to connect, control drag to clone. So if I were to click and drag that to right here, I now have an arrow that leads to this. And if I move this, the arrow moves with it. So if I need to make more room later, say it starts to get very crowded, then I can very easily move my stuff around and still have exactly the information I need. So I'm going to call this next layer A1, because this is going to be my option number one for do this thing. I'm going to type, do this thing. It actually, for instead of do this thing, it's going to be the results of what happened when your player hit that button. So say in my horror game, my person wakes up and they see a door and they see a lantern, and the first thing that they can do is try the door latch. And so if they hit one, they decide they're going to go try the door latch, they then would say, you wriggle the door latch, you find that it's locked, and then the next two options are maybe look around for a screwdriver, or a key, or ram your shoulder into the door to try to escape. Those are branching options that could work out from there, but that's kind of the idea we're going for. So blah and blur is A1. So I'm calling this A1 because it's coming off of A. So I know that these two are like one layer away from each other, and then this is the option number one. This one I'm going to call A2, and you can title your sections. So like this one is other thing, result of other thing text. So this is like a long paragraph explaining what happens whenever you go for the lantern. You discover that the lantern has oil in it but doesn't have any matches around, and or that. So maybe this one only has one other result. You find the lantern, but it doesn't have anything in it. So I'm just going to say continue. So if they press 1, they'll continue on from here. And just kind of carry on like this. So from A2, they would have two different directions they could go from there. And these ones I'll make a slightly different color so it's clear that, they're another layer removed. Click and drag to connect them. Oh wait, that one won't work because obviously there aren't enough options for that one. So I'm going to, this one has two options, right? So this one, we'll call this one B1 because it's a new layer of thing, or B0, I suppose. No, B1, how do I want to phrase this? I guess this is all very independent to you. You don't necessarily have to use my naming conventions. It's however it makes sense to you, just for the sake of ordering things and keeping it neat and organized. So, I'm going to call this one B0 because it was the only thing we could do from A2 was we could move on and do this other thing. So, stuff, things, other things, and yet another option. Now you see it is not fitting inside of my text anymore. That's fine. I'm going to just grab this, stretch it out, and you can see that it's still connected, so I can still wiggle it around and do whatever I need to do. It's still connected. So this one's going to have 3 branches off of it. That's fine. I can do that. So here's what I need you to do. Whenever you are writing your story, and you'll have plenty of time to do this, I want you to make a flowchart. Needs to have a start. You need to have at least 2 different paths that get you to the end of your game. So, like the successful, the win, the you escaped the spooky mansion, hooray. At least 2 different paths that go to that. And you need to have at least 2 different paths that go to the fail condition. So, you were eaten by a monster. And you can have multiple fails and you can have multiple ways to win, but I want you to have at least 2 different paths to winning and 2 different paths to failing. In addition to that, I want you to have at least 5 layers that get you between point A and point B. So, or point A and point, I don't know, E, I guess, and if this were the kind of naming convention you were using. So, say you have your start. There needs to be between your start and your finish 4 different choices that you make that gets you from the very beginning all the way to the end. So there would be after these 2, I need 2 more, and then the win condition that will get me to where I need to go. I know that sounds like a lot. Like I said, you will have plenty of time, but I want this to be kind of like an introduction to thinking about a game as more than just from the mechanical perspective, but also thinking about it as a narrative perspective, how you're going to make it so that your game is something that people want to reach the end of to find out what happens next. So that is your assignment for this class, and you will have to work with me, talk with me about what your plans are while you're working on it, and we'll hopefully get you started on actually building this game file next time.